welcome everyone. All right, hello, and welcome to the last webinar of this academic year of the ECPR series on Middle Eastern policy and EU relations. My name is Christos Kourtelis, and I am Assistant Professor in European Public Policy at Panteion University in Athens. The series started in September last year, and it has been a part of ECPR's response to concerns raised within the community in the wake of the conflict in Gaza and the challenges to academic freedom faced by scholars and students affected by the war. So far, our discussions cover topics such as the EU and the US approaches to the war in Gaza, the role of regional actors in shaping the MENA region, and the contemporary challenges for both the EU and the MENA region, such as the issue of migration. Our last discussion for this academic year today addresses the situation in Syria. And we have two experts with a long experience in different aspects of the challenges that Syria poses to international affairs. Dr. Regine Schwab, as some of you have heard, just returned from Syria. So she's in this process of trying to put all the information that she got from there into this very difficult puzzle. And Regine works as a research associate at Goethe-University in Frankfurt and at Peace Research University in the same city. Dr. Schwab focuses on transformations of political violence and radicalization, among other things, and she has published many papers on the Syrian case. Regine will navigate us into the different aspects of the Syrian crisis and will explain where we are at the moment. Our second speaker is Dr. Peter Seeberg. Dr. Seeberg is an associate professor at the University of Southern Denmark. His research interests are on Euro-Mediterranean relations and especially on the areas of migration and security. So Dr. Seeberg brings to the discussion his experience in these topics. He has written numerous academic and policy relevant studies about Euro-Mediterranean relations. Peter will focus more on the issue of migration and the current state of the refugee crisis. Regine and Peter, once again, thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome to the series. As we discussed before the beginning of this webinar, you have 15 to 20 minutes to present your thoughts about the topic. But before doing so, let me now pass the floor to the co-coordinator of the series on Middle Eastern policy and EU relations, my good friend, Dr. Assem Dandashly, who is Associate Professor at Maastricht University. Assem, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris, for the introduction. Thanks for Peter and Regine for being our presenters today. And also thanks for everyone who's joining and continue to join our talk for today. Now, when looking at Syria, I think this webinar is sort of a crucial webinar, especially with the events that are going really fast. Like for over a decade, Syria has endured a civil war of like a huge scale, leaving behind a landscape of human suffering, widespread destruction, displacement, and so on and so forth. And the recent ousting of Bashar al-Assad in December 2024 has undoubtedly marked a pivotal or a critical juncture, ushering in a new and complex era. However, this new era is characterized by fragmented governance, an ongoing refugee crisis, deep and uncertain pathways for true reconstruction and reconciliation. So our discussion today will delve into these critical issues, seeking to unpack the complexities of Syria's transitional moment and explore potential pathways toward a stable and inclusive future. We aim to foster an interesting and lively conversation, acknowledging the deeply sensitive nature of the challenges ahead. Firstly, I think we will be addressing the reality of governance, like the interim government led by Ahmad al-Shara and backed by various military groups who used to be like among the opposition, has taken the reins initiating significant political changes, including the dissolution of the Ba'athist parliament, pledges toward inclusive governance. And this is a moment that demands careful scrutiny, particularly given the historical context of the group who is in power now and led by Ahmad al-Sharia. And we all know that Ahmad al-Sharia was, or Abu Muhammad al-Julani has a past deeply intertwined with extremist organizations such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. While he has since disassociated himself from Al-Qaeda and rebranded his group, his trajectory from a key figure in jihadist movements to the head of Syria raises significant questions regarding the nature of the new political structures and challenges of establishing genuinely inclusive and representative governance. And the international community remains a bit in doubt on the legitimacy of this new government and the impact this will have on Syria's ability to rebuild and stabilize. And the second point, the human cost of this prolonged conflict is evident in the massive refugee crisis that we had. Like over 12 million Syrians remain forcibly displaced, with almost 4.9 or 5 million seeking refuge in neighboring countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, and another 7.4 million internally displaced within Syria. While there have been news that over 150,000 refugees returned to Syria since December 2024, might seem like a positive development, the reality on the ground is often not the same. Returnees frequently face conditions of extreme hardship, limited access to basic necessities such as shelter, healthcare, economic opportunities. And there have been recent reports highlighting that the lack of economic opportunities and essential services are the greatest obstacles for refugees' return. Many communities lack reliable access to electricity, clean water, healthcare. Issues with civil documentation hinder access to services or land rights. The question of how to ensure safe, dignified, and voluntary return for the millions displaced people remains a challenge. Thirdly, Syria's future is linked to a complex geopolitical and domestic factors. This includes the continuous Israeli attacks on Syrian sovereignty and territories since December, and even before Israel has launched hundreds of airstrikes across Syria. These attacks, while often cited by Israel as measures to prevent hostile entities from gaining a foothold, significantly compound the instability and destruction within Syria, further hindering any efforts at reconstruction and normalized governance. And finally, we must consider the crucial issue of Syria's diverse minority groups. Syria has long been a mosaic of ethnic and religious communities. While the majority of Syrians are Sunni Arabs, around 70-75% of the population, significant minorities include Alawites, around 10 to 15, Christians, around 10%, Druze, around 3%, Kurds, around 5 or 10%, in addition to Armenians and Turkmen, among others. The previous regime, dominated by the Alawite minority, often stoked sectarian divisions, and the rise of a predominantly Sunni-led government with an Islamist background raises concerns for the future protection and inclusion of these diverse communities. Building trust and ensuring the right and safety of all Syrians, regardless of their ethnic or religious background, remains crucial for any sustainable peace within Syria. And we have heard also from recent reports about the clashes between different sectarian clashes that happened, especially in March, April 2025, which also underscores the fragility of social cohesion and the urgent need for inclusive governance that genuinely represents and protects all components of Syrian societies. I can go on, but I think I will stop here. And I think these are a lot of points that will be tackled in depth by our esteemed speakers for today. So without further delay.
Yeah, let's give the floor to Regine. Regine, as you just came from Syria, you can present your experience from the ground, actually. There. Thank you very much for coming again to the series.
Thank you very much to you for organizing this great and very timely event. I think it is could not be more important to discuss the situation in Syria at the moment. So yeah, as you said, I just came back. Actually, last Thursday, I came back from a 3 weeks research trip to Syria. So my impressions are still very fresh, and I need to digest them and systematize them. But hopefully, I can give you some insights on the different aspects we talked about, like the security situation, for instance. I want to mention that I talked mostly to people that I either met in my prior field research for my PhD, which I conducted in Turkey and mostly at the Syrian-Turkish border, but also in other Turkish cities. And interestingly, in 2017, 2018, when I conducted most of my interviews, many of my interview partners were actually very, very critical of al-Jolani and his group, Jabhat al-Nusra or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But actually, quite a few of them returned to Syria and also actually reconciled with al-Jolani or al-Shara, some of them already like 2 years ago or so. So now I found them in either kind of governmental positions or working with the local administration, for instance, in Aleppo, in different kinds of institutions, which is, I think, in itself a very interesting experience these people made and why they kind of ended up actually reconciling with al-Shara, because many of them were really critical of him. So that's one set of people I talked to. And the other set of people are also working kind of in government affiliated institutions. And most of them were in Idlib, working, I think, mostly in the civil administration, but some of them also actually fighting. So these are the main actors I talked to. But then also I talked to one Christian representative and a few civil society representatives, and also a lawyer working in the field of transitional justice. Just to give you an idea, of course, kind of these the set of interviewees or these persons are not representative, so I cannot kind of give you a perspective on all the groups in Syria, but this is kind of what I report now is based on what these people told me. And I think in many cases it has to be taken with a grain of salt, right? I mean, when it's people working with the government, they have certain interests and they represent the situation in a certain way. Nonetheless, when we first of all look at the security situation, I think this is, of course, one of the most important aspects. So I can report that it was good in the areas that I visited. So I was mostly in Damascus, Aleppo, and Idlib, but then also was for a short time in Homs and Hama, which is basically also on the way to these other cities. The security forces are present. In the beginning, it was quite frightening for me because these are men with black clothes and masks, but they were really friendly. There were no incidents. They were not really also checking the cars. I witnessed no incident. But this, of course, doesn't mean, like, for instance, in Damascus is a very big city. And shortly before I arrived, there was unfortunately a very bad incident in Jaramana, which is south of Damascus, a little bit in the suburbs, where many Druze and also Christians live. And the security forces entered this area violently, and there were clashes with Druze actors, and there were also civilians and security forces killed. So, I mean, this obviously, what I say is, or in terms of that the security situation is good, does not apply to every place. But by and large, I did not witness any larger incidents. I think, of course, when we look to the coast where I didn't go, when we look to the northeast, and when we look to Sweda, the situation is very different. And also at Dara, the security situation there is very bad, actually. Shootings happen quite frequently. Yeah, so this is kind of the security situation concerning the armed groups. So now, kind of according to the most recent information, many of these former, or actually most of the armed groups that were active before and that were kind of in some way or another affiliated with HTS or allies of HTS, and they are now dissolved into the new army. So this is what they say, and I think there is a certain truth to it. But again, when kind of these violations and transgressions happened that I also just mentioned, like in Jaramana, but also in Sueda, then the government usually says, well, these are groups that are not affiliated with us. These are kind of single actors that are kind of out of control. This is, of course, a bit contradictory to when they say, well, now all the groups joined the army. But this is really a multitude of groups. So I think at the practical level, there are still challenges here that this integration is really complete. But I think it is happening, and it has been relatively calm when we consider this multitude of groups. So there have been no major clashes between these armed groups, which I think is a good sign. And it is an achievement because we see that often in other conflicts after a war ends, former allies start actually fighting against each other. We don't see that in Syria so far, and I think this is due to the constellation that HTS built in northwestern Syria in the prior years with the other groups, where it monopolized military and administrative power since 2017 in Idlib and adjacent areas. And it allowed the other groups a presence, but they were purely reduced to military factions that fought with HTS, but they did not have any kind of political or governance role anymore. So this was under the control of HTS. And then in 2019, 2020, this was a very decisive experience. Many people I talked to reported this. So the opposition lost quite some areas in the northwest close to Idlib city. And this created an existential pressure on the groups that were still in the northwest, HTS and its allies, to actually unify, to professionalize. And since 2020, we have really seen kind of this institutionalization of cooperation in a military council, which was obligatory for all groups, an operations room where all groups had to participate, and it was clear like each group had a specific role. HTS was responsible for the overall decisions of war and peace. It trained the fighters of other groups. It paid their wages. It was an interesting setting, but I think this explains, on the one hand, their success in 2024 in December, but also it may explain why currently there are no major clashes between these groups. And now even this kind of integration or institutionalization has gone beyond allies. It has even extended to former ideological enemies like Jaish al-Islam. I don't know if you remember this group. It was in charge of Eastern Ghouta, close to Damascus. It is a very ideological group, Salafi, but very different from Jabhat al-Nusra. It was displaced to the north after the Assad regime and the Russians retook Ghouta in 2018. And they really remained enemies, like ideological enemies of HTS. But even through some intermediaries, HTS managed to convince them to join the army, which is important because they are actually tasked with defending Damascus in case Daesh should threaten Damascus. And they have a really ideological project, and they have fought Daesh since the beginning. So this kind of makes sense from a strategic perspective. But I think it's interesting to see that they even managed to convince former ideological enemies, of course, still within this stream of Sunni Islamist groups, right? I mean, it's a different story with the Kurds. When we now look at the government and the administration, we see a very high centralization of all important decisions. So basically, the president al-Shara and the foreign minister al-Shibani, they take all the important decisions, even down to nominations of people to certain positions, right? I mean, maybe even to the medium level, maybe not really down to the kind of just some employees, but the leadership positions are all appointed by them, which of course is tedious, but also may make us think in terms of, yeah, what does this strong centralization actually mean? It's partly related, I think, to trust issues, but it's not a good boat definitely for kind of, yeah, decentralization and democracy. And most institutions, we see that the leadership figures, they were replaced, but the old staff basically was retained. So here we have a certain continuity. This is, I think, different, very different with the police, with the defense ministry, and with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and External Affairs. I think here we have a complete change of personnel. We also see that many of the administrative elites that were in Idlib and that were running the administration, they are also the military files in the last years. They have now moved to Aleppo and Damascus and have taken over leadership positions there in ministries and administrative institutions, and somehow try to maybe replicate the experiences they made and the institutions they built in Idlib. And then there is a very interesting, so Shibani, basically, he was in charge of politics and media in Idlib since 2020, the current former Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he has an outsized role in these issues, which may be surprising because, for instance, in Germany, politics and media, I think it's not a file that is affiliated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but we can talk more about that in the Q&A. And again, I think it is very interesting in order to understand them, in order to understand the government, to look at what they did in Idlib, where they really tried to, since 2017, try to build an alternative to the regime. I mean, there were kind of attempts of rebel governance since the beginning of the conflict, and I have written on this, like the early attempts in Aleppo to create like administrative council, to create even judicial courts. But all these attempts were really bad because usually a multitude of groups was involved, and then these groups took over control of different sectors. So somehow Giuliani and the people that were around him, they realized it cannot go on like this for military reasons, but also we need to provide for the people that are in Idlib. So they started to build a more professional, technocratic government. And I think they really learned from the early stages of the administration in the rebel-held territories that were really chaotic and negative. And I think they have become rather professional and sophisticated. For instance, they developed new ID cards. They have completely digitalized personal records. I talked to the person who was responsible for this in Idlib and is now trying to do it in Aleppo. So at that level, it's somehow impressive and very, very advanced and modern, and also kind of trying to serve the citizen in that sense, because we should not forget that the treatment also, the everyday treatment by the regime was very bad, by the Syrian regime, the former regime. Even when you went just to maybe renew your driver's license or whatever, you were humiliated. So they really also try to change how they actually serve the people in a certain sense. And then I think also a very important experience were the 2023 protests in Idlib. Maybe you have heard that. There were protests against Giuliani, against his salvation government. But several people reported, even like former activists that were in these protests, they reported that he responded positively. So he sat down with the people and asked them, what are your demands? What can we do? And this kind of, I think, is also maybe partly important for explaining why also, because this was also my impression and we can discuss it. Actually, many people like him and many people are happy with the government to a certain degree. So I think we can see that Idlib is a really very important experience in what they do now, both from a military, but also from an administrative governance perspective. And yeah, I mean, we can discuss this further, but there's also the clear view by others that are not affiliated with the government that under the table, I mean, the Hay'a, like the former Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Giuliani's former military group, is now dissolved, but under the table, it controls most things. So although maybe they have appointed different people to different positions, there is always some ally, for instance, as a vice minister or vice director, that is affiliated with the Hay'a, and then that takes the decisions basically that also al-Shara and maybe Shibani and others want. So this was also one perspective that was given, and of course critical perspective that was given by someone outside of the government. Maybe well, I don't know how do I do with time?
You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Maybe then I'm happy to also talk about, of course, ideology more, their ideology, but maybe I keep that for the Q&A because already I think I mentioned some things. But also I want to give you an insight into the economy the economic situation is a catastrophe. As already also was mentioned by the organizers, one of the organizers, there is electricity in Damascus like between 2 and 5 hours a day, of course not continuous. Damascus is a very, I mean, I had the feeling that it stopped developing after the 1990s. Of course, you have the beautiful old town, but many buildings reminded me of kind of post-Soviet times. So it is in that sense, yeah, it seemed that everything stopped developing. There is no electricity, shortage of electricity. The wages are extremely low, like all over the country. People earn like 30 euro per month, like when they work, for instance, in a public institution or they work in the university, they earn 30 euro per month. Of course, I mean, they barely survive, right? They cannot afford anything. So the economic situation in the former regime-controlled areas is catastrophic. This again contrasts with Idlib, which is very interesting because I was surprised how developed Idlib actually is. There is electricity 24 hours. This, of course, relates to the border and the Turkish, I mean, Turkey let the border open and delivered goods and there was a regular border exchange. So there is electricity 24 hours a day. There are new roads. There are shopping malls. There is an industrial city. Sarmada is like an industrial city. You have like industrial zones. People work 24/7. Now there's also a big demand for like reconstruction. So I was really surprised also contrasting these two places, Damascus and Idlib, in terms of the economic situation and the development. Then maybe closing with some observations on the topics of transitional justice and kind of what I got, how kind of Syrian society is or what people think. I mean, this is just my impression. Of course, transitional justice is a huge issue. It just needs several talks for itself. But I talked to a lawyer who works in this field. And so he said that they try to work with the government on this issue. The government, some short time ago, created a national committee for transitional justice. They create many of these committees, which is a great sign. There's also a committee for disappeared persons, but then sometimes maybe it's more of a show. I mean, we have to see what these committees actually really do, because often the leaders of these committees, they are no experts, but they try to work with this committee, like this lawyer and his organization, provide technical support. And he reported that they suggested the idea of special courts to the government, like similar to what happened in Germany after the Second World War in Nuremberg. And they are also suggesting to reform the Syrian law for that, of course, but because it's not fit for this purpose. But these courts would only be for members of the Assad regime and only for the highest figures. So there is, I mean, accountability would be one pillar of this, and the other would be reconciliation. So more for the kind of, smaller crimes or maybe more bystanders. They would not be tried in these courts, only really the most important figures. And there has been some criticism that these kind of courts, or in general transitional justice, or at least accountability, is only meant for members of the Assad regime and not for members of the opposition. But interestingly, he did not see any problem with that. So he said members of the opposition, like of the armed groups that are also involved in human rights violations or even war crimes, they could be tried in existing courts. They could be tried based on the existing legal framework. I don't know how realistic that is, but he said that we only need these special courts for members of the Assad regime, not for other people. So I think that is, I think many people in the West, but also Syrians, have a different perspective on this. And he also reported that currently land and property is often expropriated without a legal basis, based on the accusation that someone has been a member of the regime or someone has committed crimes. And he also strongly criticized that and said, yeah, that's basically the same what the Assad regime did. You cannot do this. But so I think transitional justice is a problematic issue. There are also kind of private revenge acts happening a lot because people have experienced terrible things, and sometimes perpetrators and victims, they meet again in the same place. So this is a huge challenge for the society. But also maybe on a positive note, there are people working on this. They're specialists, they're lawyers, they're civil society. I think they need our support, but they're great people on the ground that push the government and have expertise. So that's maybe a sign of hope. And finally, ending with like an observation on Syrian society, or maybe kind of at least the majority of the society, which are Sunnis. So most people seem to be, first of all, people are relieved. They are really, I mean, the liberation is nobody expected it, and they are very relieved. They voice their opinion, they discuss politics. This is something that Syrians have not done in more than 50 years. And I got the sense that most people are somehow happy with the government. They like their president. But they have a certain fear and mistrust of everything and everyone that could challenge the government or challenge this achievement. For instance, I talked with a civil society activist, and she said they organized a vigil in Damascus after the massacres at the coast in spring. And they were holding up pictures of both security forces that were killed, and of course also pictures of civilians like the Alawites that were killed. And they were attacked not by the security forces. I mean, during the Assad regime, they would have been attacked by security forces. They were attacked by their fellow citizens, telling them, you are fulul, you are remnants of the regime, you belong to the regime, you somehow want to destroy like what we have here. So I think there's also huge work to be done here, intra-societal dialogue, and that, yeah, people learn to discuss and to voice different opinions. And yeah, I mean, we should not forget this is maybe also natural, because people do not only come out of this terrible war, but also out of more than 50 years of dictatorship. But again, ending on a positive note, there are many civil society activities. Civil society is very active. So there is definitely a lot of hope here. And now just at the end, I want to show you some pictures, just a few pictures. Can you see them? So this is like a famous panorama, like who has been in Damascus knows it. And people have, as you see, painted over the face of Hafez and have written free. I think this is a very beautiful, beautiful symbol. Yeah, on a more, does this move? Yeah, on a more sad level, I mean, as was already mentioned, the level of destruction is immense. I mean, I knew that the destruction is terrible, but when I saw it, I could not believe it. So you have completely, like Damascus, the city is completely fine. The outskirts are completely destroyed. Like sometimes, as you see here, there is almost nothing left. It's basically a desert and some skeletons of buildings in the background. Sometimes you have still the skeletons of buildings and maybe more complete buildings, but I mean, all these things have to be leveled down, right? You cannot kind of renovate such a house. So it's a huge challenge. This is a picture from Sednaya, from the notorious prison and torture chamber. I had the chance to visit it. It is basically left, like after the liberation of the prison, it's left like this. So you see all the personal things that people left behind. This was such a shocking and touching experience to go there and see it. This is some instrument the regime used, or the prison responsibles used to torture people. This is the outside area of the prison. It's huge. I mean, we just saw a really small part. This is like a cell. I mean, before you saw a cell with like sunlight, like windows, this is a cell in the basement. There was no sunlight, no window whatsoever. So this was like, I cannot find words like to describe it, but just want to at least briefly show you that. And then in Idlib also the destruction is even worse, I think, than around Damascus. So this all mostly happened in 2019-20. Like here, they broke the walls of a house to basically create space for a tank. So this was the Syrian regime and the Russians or some pro-regime militias. This is a hospital where one of my friends, a medical doctor, worked for basically a very long time, many years. It was so often attacked and then destroyed completely in 2019-20. If you know anything, we are trying to raise some funds to rebuild the hospital. Get in touch with me. I think this would be extremely important. This is in Idlib, Sarakib. This would be extremely important for the returnees. This is the hospital inside. Here you see, I think people left like their fingerprints, like before they left. This is in front of the hospital. Just you see some medical equipment, and it's just it's hard to describe these pictures. This is in Idlib city when I entered. I mean, this was kind of interesting to see, like this huge flag with the Shahada, like the Islamic creed. This is something I have only seen in Idlib city, which was basically the center of the kind of rebel administration. And this, to end on a positive note, this is also in Idlib city. And it says Syria لكل السوريين, Syria for all Syrians. This is also my wish for Syrians and the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Regine. Peter, one of the key challenges for the new government and for Europe, for the European Union too, is related to migration, to refugees. So we're looking forward to hear your thoughts about the state matter.
Yeah, fine. And thank you very much for arranging this seminar, and thank you for inviting me to attend for sure. I've been looking forward to this fine seminar. As I mentioned, I've made a few slides, so I guess I should start that. I wonder, can you see this?
Not yet. I don't know if Abigail can help.
If you click on share,
Yeah.
and then it's like what will pop up a screen? Yeah.
And then it should work.
Yeah, now we see. Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Fantastic. We are tuned. We are fine-tuned now. Excellent.
As you already mentioned, I was asked to focus on the refugees in this specific recent context, and you suggested in a mail a few days ago to focus on these two aspects. So this is what I'm going to do. I mean, here we are. We have a new situation in Syria now, and we're all, I guess, well, at least very surprised. I came to think a few days ago when I sat and prepared for this arrangement that, I mean, we're moving ahead. I mean, we're speaking of half a year now, so it's certainly, and Regine already touched upon that. I mean, we're in a situation where it begins to look as a stable situation to some extent, at least. But now what? And I mean, looking specifically at the question of the refugees, it seems to me as well that there you can see a somewhat pragmatic policy from the side of the new regime, and I will illustrate this point by looking at the relationship between the new regime and the three neighboring states, Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, and also focus a little bit maybe on Iraq and Egypt and the global actors. And I mean, to start with a few numbers, I will not go into detail, but it could be useful maybe to just look a little bit on the recent situation. Now we're down to 4.5 million Syrian refugees in the region, down from 5,631,640 in April 2022, plus the around 1 million in Europe. And as we all know, I guess we also still have 7 million internally displaced refugees in Syria. But what is happening? Well, it seems that some have crossed back a little more than 500,000 since December 2024, and more than 800,000 since the beginning of 2024. So, I mean, things are moving, but still it's a slow process for sure. And this, I guess, this at least is my view, is a good thing. I mean, we do not want a chaotic situation where millions of Syrians are coming back. I mean, in a very short development. Also, when looking at the IDPs, 1.2 million have returned to their homes since early December 2024. And we should also think of there that also we have seen around 500,000 newly displaced since within the same period. So, I mean, you have a very dynamic situation where, well, more or less, I mean, everything can happen. But again, so far, it seems as if it's working. And let's look at Turkey. We're down now to a little less than 3 million Syrians registered in Turkey by the government. The UNHCR are not active there directly. And this is a deal struck between Turkey and the US UNHCR. That's why it is like it is. You still also have 70,000 refugees in camps in Turkey. But I mean, by far, most of them are working in the Turkish cities, and again, I mean, it works. It's a relatively stable situation in Turkey as well. Legally speaking, the Syrians in Turkey have a status as temporary protected. This is part of the official deal, and even some of them have acquired Turkish citizenship. I mean, imagine over such a long period, you will have some marriages, you will have a development where things change a bit. And there is here something of a paradox, you could say. It seems that many Syrians feel integrated in Turkey. I'm sure that, I mean, many of the Turks, of the Syrians in Turkey will stay there for a long time. Probably many of them for good, I guess. But I mean, we'll have to see. Whereas many Turkish people think that the Syrians constitute a problem for them in many different ways, and in an article I read, it says that 88.5% of Turks think that the Syrians should be sent home or should return home. But it is interesting that, I mean, this very fact is not a determining factor for the Syrians who actually have returned already. I mean, when looking at the relationship between the new regime in Syria and the government of Turkey, we have had a meeting. We have had several meetings, by the way, but in the latest meeting between Bashar and Erdogan, our friend from Syria says, well, we would like to have a development in our relationship with Turkey based on deep strategic cooperation, whatever that is. And I mean, it emphasizes that you have a dialogue which so far is, well, not very deep, not very tangible, but very, I mean, preliminary. When it comes to Erdogan, surprise, surprise. I mean, here you have a skilled tactician, a person who understands to move. I mean, when it comes to international relations, and let us quote. He says, "Our policy will be as follows: we will assist those who want to return, but we will not force anyone to leave. For our brothers and sisters contributing to Turkish economic, academic, scientific, or commercial life, we will keep our doors open if they want to stay." I mean, this is really interesting, and I mean, it's typical for Erdogan in my view, and it's certainly, I mean, the right thing to say right now when looking at, I mean, prospects for Erdogan, who, as in my view, I mean, is standing out as the winner of the recent situation. I mean, in comparison to Russia, of course, and Iran as well. But let us carry on and look at Lebanon, where you have a little more than 700,000 UNHCR registered Syrians, and I mean, no camps, as we know. And I mean, this is only partly the truth, actually, because you have camps in Lebanon, but I mean, not official camps. The official Lebanese position is that we don't want to have camps. And I think that the new or the recent political development in Lebanon might change this a little bit. It has been the Hezbollah insisting on having, I mean, a very critical position vis-a-vis the refugees, but I mean, still it is claimed by the government of Lebanon that the number of Syrian refugees in Lebanon is around 1.5 million. I don't know if this is true, but it's certainly, of course, a higher number than the one mentioned in the statistics of the UNHCR. Lebanon is not a signatory of the Refugee Convention, and this, of course, is important, but still, however, I mean, for the Syrians in Lebanon who are registered by the UNHCR, you have some legal protection, but you certainly also still have many different problems, and one of the problems is that I mean, you are blamed for all the trouble. I mean, in parts of the Lebanese media, and you have a public discourse vis-a-vis the Syrians, which is still very, very critical in my view. I visit Lebanon every year. I teach in November in a Christian university there, and I mean, I have many contacts there, and I think it's interesting to see the very dramatic differences between the position vis-a-vis the Syrians in Lebanon, and the same in Jordan, and also to some extent in Turkey. UNHCR has recently reported that some Syrians have been deported, and during this development in connection with the Israeli attacks in Lebanon, some municipalities asked the Syrians to stay in Syria afterwards and not come back, in a rather well, I wouldn't say aggressive way, but I mean, it's very obvious that the Lebanese broadly speaking, have this this critical view on the situation with the Syrians. A recent meeting, the latest meeting was in March. You had a situation where I mean, again, the focus was mainly on the return of Syrians. And I mean, if we compare to what Erdogan just said, in the same situation in Turkey, it's a different way of looking at the situation, for sure, from the Lebanese viewpoint. And if we look at Jordan, we're down at a little more than 500,000 UNHCR registered Syrians there. A little more than 100,000 in the Jordanian camps. There was a peak back in 2013 where you had almost 1 million Syrians in Lebanon, but I mean it quickly went down, and since 2014-15 we have had a relatively stable situation, moving down towards the situation that you have now. But it should be mentioned, of course, that this should be seen on the background of the fact that you have 1.3 million Syrians in Jordan. Many of them have been there for years. Some, I mean, are there for seasonal work of different kinds, and it's a very dynamic situation, actually. And again, this is certainly also a difference when compared to the situation in Lebanon. So it's a stable situation in Jordan, relatively speaking. I was just in Brussels last week and talked to a guy at the Jordanian embassy to Brussels, and I mean he agreed with me that it's not without problems, but it works. It's okay with us, as he says. And I mean, this, of course, is also the statement by a trained diplomat, but I think it's also to some extent a factual reality. Jordan is well funded. I mean, we send euros to Jordan. You have US aid, you have support from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf GCC states, who even invited Jordan to be part of the GCC. I mean, I think it was last year, and an interesting situation for sure. You have many different projects in Jordan funded by the EU, and it's not too successful, but I mean it maintains a situation which is, as I mentioned before, relatively stable in my view. The Jordanians are pragmatists, and I mean, I've been sitting in ministries in Jordan doing interviews, and they say, look here, Peter, we know they are here, and we think it's no big deal. It can work for years, seen from our side, and it's okay. It's okay with us. When it comes to the recent situation with the relationship between the new regime in Syria and King Abdullah or other speakers from the side of the Jordanian regime, it is indicated that Jordan will accept the presence of Syrians for still the years to come. And this, of course, is very interesting. And I mean, in my view, it's the right viewpoint, and of course, it's also a viewpoint which has an element of migration diplomacy to it. It is also, I mean, what the Jordanians, know that we would like to hear. And this is also, of course, a point in itself. If we turn to how we should deal with it, and when I say we, I mean the regimes in the Middle East, but certainly also us in the West. I mean, we have a situation where we can see that of the people having returned to Syria so far, 50% come from Lebanon, 22% from Turkey, 13% from Iraq, very few from Egypt and Jordan as well. But partly, I mean, the Jordan situation is also a result of the fact that it's very dynamic. I mean, you have a back and forth situation there, often beyond the control of the UNHCR for many different reasons. It is said that around 1 million IDPs intend to return within the next year. I mean, this, of course, is only an estimate. We cannot know anything precisely about this, but certainly things are happening for sure. And it seems, and I'm basing this on a book which is a few years old. I don't know if you know this fine book by Maha Yahya, who's the leader of Carnegie in Beirut. In this book, she found out that, I mean, what is important for the refugees wanting to return to Syria is the form of government. And the book, of course, is written before the new situation. So in a way, you could say that this point is already to some extent settled. I mean, you have a new situation which seems to be somewhat stable. Also, of course, they care about the availability of livelihood and the availability of housing and government services. But as Regine already pointed out, I mean, there you really have the many problems. Turkey, for instance, has arranged so-called go and see visits. I think this is a fantastic idea, and it's commented and discussed in much of the articles that I have had time to read before this meeting. This, of course, is a good idea. I mean, if you guarantee a re-entry to whatever we might be speaking of, Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, etc., or, I mean, how about Europe for that matter? This is a different story, I guess. And I mean, then what? I mean, what should be done? I've been looking at the literature about this. This is not my field, I mean, specifically, but let us have a look at I mean, one of the experts on this from an article in Refugees International. And I will just, I mean, point to the important things to be done in the coming period. And of course, I mean, it goes without saying that these elements in an overall strategy would be extremely important. Also, of course, things like like this. It is very important that the US and the EU stop their sanctions, and this, as you know, of course, has been. I mean, it has been decided, but we still have to wait and see. In particular, when it comes to the US decision, the EU, I guess, has started working on this, and I was in the commission last week talking to a person there, and she said that as far as she knew, I mean, we're certainly working on it, and this, of course, would be extremely important for the success when it comes to a dignified and well-functioning return of the refugees to Syria. But I mean, it is also the viewpoint of this person in the commission, and the viewpoint of me for sure. I mean, take it easy, for sure. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Peter. Assem?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot, Peter. Thank you also, Regine, again. I don't know if you want to add anything to what Peter said, or you have any response to each other before we open it.
No, I think these two perspectives really complement each other very well. And so I don't have anything to add. I think this is obviously an extremely important issue for Syria returnees. And I was just my friend, one of my friends in Idlib just sent me a video with basically a convoy of people returning, but these are internally displaced people returning from the camps, sometimes to their destroyed houses, but people want to return to their houses even though they are destroyed. But this is an extremely important issue. So I'm very grateful for this perspective.
It was indeed both presentations shed, light to aspects of, the Syrian situation, politically also, about the refugees.